On a warm August evening in 1996, 14-year-old Caroline Glachan stepped out of her family home in the quiet Scottish town of Bonhill. She had plans to meet someone that night, but by morning, everything had changed forever. The next day, a concerned resident made a call that would shatter a community's peace. On the other end of the line, a voice described something no one should have to witness, a discovery by the water that would launch one of Scotland's most enduring mysteries. Training shoes lay abandoned on the grass nearby, and what had been found would confirm a family's worst fears. For 27 years, Caroline's family lived with unanswered questions. Who was responsible? Why did it happen? And how did 3 people manage to hide the truth for so long? This is the story of a case that went cold, until a single breakthrough in 2019 changed everything. What police discovered next would shock an entire community and finally bring justice to a family who never stopped believing. But the path to the truth, it was darker than anyone could have imagined. If you're ready to uncover one of Scotland's most complex cold cases, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Caroline Glachan was everything a 14-year-old should be, full of life, dreams, and possibilities. Living in the small Scottish town of Bonhill, nestled along the banks of the River Leven, Caroline was known for her bright smile and close friendships. She attended the local secondary school and, like many teenagers, was navigating the complexities of young relationships. Bonhill was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, a quiet community where children played safely in the streets and families felt secure, leaving their doors unlocked. The River Leven flowed peacefully through the town, its banks a popular spot for evening walks and quiet reflection. But on the August night in 1996, this peaceful setting would become the backdrop for something unthinkable. Caroline had made plans to meet her boyfriend, Robert O'Brien, despite concerns from those closest to her. Her best friend had tried to warn her about Robert's behavior, but Caroline was determined to go. As darkness fell over Bonhill, Caroline walked toward the Dillichet Bridge, unaware that she was stepping into a nightmare that would haunt her community for decades. The evening of August 24th, 1996, started like any other summer night in Bonhill. Caroline had spent the day with friends, but as evening approached, she received a message that would change everything. Robert O'Brien, her 18-year-old boyfriend, wanted to meet her near the river. Those who knew Caroline well had grown increasingly worried about her relationship with Robert. Friends had witnessed his controlling behavior, his unpredictable temper, and the way he seemed to isolate Caroline from those who cared about her. Her best friend had specifically warned her not to go that night, sensing something wasn't right. But Caroline, like many young people in love, believed she could handle whatever came her way. She told her family she was going out for a walk and left her home around 9 o'clock, heading toward the familiar path that led to Dillichet Bridge. What Caroline didn't know was that Robert wasn't alone that night. With him were 2 others, 16-year-old Andrew Kelly and 17-year-old Donna Marie Brand, who was actually Robert's other girlfriend. The 3 had been drinking, and their mood was growing increasingly aggressive as the evening wore on. The meeting point was secluded, away from the main roads and houses. The River Leven flowed quietly below the bridge, its dark waters reflecting the last light of the summer evening. For locals, this was a peaceful spot, but on this night, it would become something far more sinister. When Caroline arrived, she quickly realized this wasn't the romantic meeting she had expected. The atmosphere was tense, charged with an energy that made her increasingly uncomfortable. What started as a confrontation escalated rapidly into something far more dangerous. Witnesses would later place the group near the bridge around 10 o'clock. A 4-year-old boy named Archie Wilson was playing nearby with friends when he witnessed something that would stay with him forever. Years later, he would tell investigators about seeing a girl by the water, about raised voices, and about something terrible happening that his young mind could barely comprehend. The attack was swift and brutal. Caroline found herself outnumbered, with nowhere to run and no one to help her. In those terrifying final moments, she endured something no person should ever face, a violent assault that would leave investigators struggling to understand how 3 young people could commit such an act. The quiet summer evening was shattered by what happened next. Caroline, unconscious and helpless, was left to face the cold waters of the River Leven. The three who had taken everything from her simply walked away, leaving behind a scene that would haunt everyone who discovered it. As the night grew darker, Caroline's family began to worry. She should have been home by now. Phone calls were made, friends were contacted, but no one had seen her since she had left for her walk. The peaceful town of Bonhill was about to wake up to a nightmare that would change everything. By morning, the search would begin, and within hours, that devastating phone call would come, the one that confirmed every parent's worst fear and launched an investigation that would span nearly 3 decades.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
I just found a body there. It's in the water.
You know, is it a male or a female?
I think that you see the young boys that's down there with me?
Uh-huh.
Well, they think you know who it is because of the training shoes. The pair of training shoes lying on the grass,
Uh-huh.
right, and the body's lying in the water. But it is a body, it's definitely a person.
Male or female?
Female.
What happened by the River Leven that night would become one of Scotland's most enduring mysteries, a case that would test the limits of justice and prove that sometimes the truth takes decades to surface. The discovery on August 25th sent shockwaves through Bonhill. What had been found in the River Leven confirmed everyone's worst fears. Caroline Glachan would never be coming home. The initial examination revealed the horrifying truth. She had suffered at least 10 significant blows to the head before being placed in the water, where she ultimately lost her life. Detective Inspector John MacLeod was assigned to lead what would become one of Scotland's most challenging investigations. The crime scene told a partial story. Caroline's training shoes were found on the riverbank, and there were signs of a struggle near the bridge. But in 1996, forensic technology was limited, and the physical evidence was frustratingly sparse. The first phase of the investigation focused on Caroline's final hours. Police quickly learned about her plans to meet Robert O'Brien, making him an immediate person of interest. When questioned, Robert claimed he had been elsewhere that evening, providing what seemed like a solid alibi. Andrew Kelly and Donna Marie Brand also gave statements, each corroborating the other's stories about their whereabouts, but inconsistencies began to emerge almost immediately. Witness accounts didn't align with the alibis provided. Several people reported seeing the trio near the river around the time Caroline disappeared, yet all three maintained they were somewhere else entirely. The problem was proving it. Young Archie Wilson's account presented both an opportunity and a challenge. At just 4 years old, his testimony about seeing a girl by the water was considered unreliable by the standards of the time. Child witnesses were often dismissed, their accounts viewed as too influenced by imagination or suggestion. This decision would haunt the investigation for decades. As weeks turned to months, the case began to stall. The three suspects maintained their silence, and without concrete physical evidence linking them to the scene, prosecutors felt they didn't have enough for charges. The investigation was scaled back, then eventually shelved, leaving Caroline's family devastated and the community living with unanswered questions. For years, Margaret McKeach, Caroline's mother, refused to let the case die. She organized vigils, spoke to media outlets, and constantly pressured police to keep investigating. She knew in her heart who was responsible, but knowing and proving were two very different things. The breakthrough came in 2019, 23 years after Caroline's life was taken. Police Scotland's major investigation team made the decision to reopen the case using modern investigative techniques and fresh eyes. Detective Chief Inspector Suzanne Chow took charge of what would become Operation Anagram. The new investigation was methodical and comprehensive. Over 200 people were re-interviewed, including many who had been children at the time of the original crime. Technology had advanced dramatically, allowing for new analysis of existing evidence and a complete review of all witness statements. The team discovered that the original alibis provided by Robert, Andrew, and Donna contained significant gaps and contradictions that hadn't been fully explored in 1996. Mobile phone records, which were primitive in the original investigation, could now be analyzed more thoroughly. CCTV footage from local businesses was enhanced using modern techniques. Most importantly, investigators decided to take another look at Archie Wilson's childhood testimony. Now an adult, Archie was able to provide more detailed recollections of that night, what he had seen as a 4-year-old boy and had tried to tell adults at the time, suddenly became a crucial piece of the puzzle. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior among the 3 suspects in the years following Caroline's demise. There had been whispered conversations, changed stories, and attempts to influence potential witnesses. What the new team uncovered was evidence of a conspiracy of silence that had lasted for more than 2 decades. As the evidence mounted, the case began to build momentum. Modern forensic techniques were applied to items that had been stored since 1996. Psychological profiles were developed to understand the group dynamics that had led to such a brutal act. So far, police had no concrete proof, no confession, and 3 suspects who had maintained their innocence for over 20 years. Yet the town wasn't sleeping easy, because everyone knew that justice delayed was not justice denied, and the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long it takes. In late 2019, just as the reopened investigation was gaining momentum, something unexpected happened that would change everything. A phone call came into the major investigation team, not from a witness or a tip line, but from someone whose conscience had finally caught up with them after 23 years of silence. The caller had information about conversations that had taken place in the days following Caroline's disappearance. They revealed that Robert O'Brien, Andrew Kelly, and Donna Marie Brand had been heard discussing details that only someone present that night could have known, details that had never been released to the public. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source: advances in psychological profiling and interview techniques that hadn't existed in 1996. When investigators re-examined the original statements given by the 3 suspects, they discovered something remarkable. The alibis weren't just inconsistent with each other, they were impossible. Using modern mapping technology and timeline analysis, detectives proved that the trio couldn't have been where they claimed to be at the times they specified. The distances were too great, the timing didn't work, and witnesses had been placed in locations where they demonstrably weren't. Then came the moment that broke the case wide open. During a routine re-interview in 2020, Andrew Kelly's composure finally cracked. After decades of maintaining his innocence, inconsistencies in his story became impossible to ignore. Under gentle but persistent questioning, Kelly admitted he had been present during an altercation by the river, though he still maintained he hadn't directly harmed Caroline. This partial admission created a domino effect. If Kelly was there, then the entire alibi structure the 3 had maintained for over 2 decades began to crumble. Investigators used this leverage to apply pressure to the other suspects, particularly Donna Marie Brand, who had been only 17 at the time of the incident. The investigation revealed that Brand had been struggling with guilt for years. Friends and family members were re-interviewed, and several came forward to describe how Donna had seemed haunted by something from her past. She had made cryptic comments about knowing something terrible and had suffered from anxiety and depression that seemed to stem from unresolved trauma. But perhaps most shocking was what investigators discovered about the group dynamic that night. Rather than a random act of violence, evidence suggested this had been a premeditated confrontation. Robert O'Brien had deliberately arranged to meet Caroline in an isolated location, bringing Kelly and Brand with him for reasons that became chillingly clear. Text messages and social media posts from years after the crime, evidence that hadn't existed during the original investigation, revealed ongoing communication between the 3 suspects. They had been coordinating their stories, checking with each other before speaking to police, and maintaining their conspiracy of silence well into the 2000s. The final piece of the puzzle came from forensic evidence that had been preserved, but not fully analyzed, in 1996. Using modern DNA techniques and enhanced fingerprint analysis, investigators found traces that definitively placed all 3 suspects at the scene during the time Caroline lost her life. 27 years after that terrible night by the River Leven, the wall of silence was finally beginning to crack. In March 2022, 26 years after Caroline Glachan lost her life, 3 arrest warrants were finally issued, the moment Margaret McKeach had waited for. Through decades of sleepless nights and unanswered prayers, was finally arriving. Robert O'Brien, now 44, was arrested at his home in the early hours of the morning. Andrew Kelly, 42, was taken into custody shortly after. Donna Marie Brand, 43, was the last to be apprehended. Breaking down as officers read her the charges that had been waiting for her since 1996. The trial began in November 2023 at Glasgow High Court, drawing national attention as the case that had haunted Scotland for nearly 3 decades finally reached its conclusion. Over 2 weeks, prosecutors meticulously presented the evidence that had taken years to assemble. The breakthrough testimony came from Andrew Kelly himself, who finally admitted his presence at the scene. His partial confession unraveled the entire web of lies the trio had maintained. Donna Marie Brand's defense team argued she had been a frightened teenager, too afraid to intervene or speak out, but it was the forensic evidence that proved decisive. DNA analysis, impossible in 1996, definitively placed all 3 at the riverside that night. The timeline reconstruction showed their alibis were fabricated, and witness testimony, including adult Archie Wilson's recollections, painted a clear picture of what had happened. On December 15, 2023, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts for all 3 defendants. Judge Lord Braid described their actions as brutal, depraved, and above all, wicked. The courtroom fell silent as he announced the sentences that had been waiting 27 years to be delivered. Robert O'Brien received life imprisonment with a minimum of 22 years. Andrew Kelly was sentenced to life with 18 years minimum. Donna Marie Brand, despite her age at the time of the crime, received life with a minimum of 17 years. As the sentences were read, Margaret McKeach wept, not just from relief, but from the knowledge that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived for her daughter Caroline. 27 years is a long time to wait for justice. 27 years of sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and a mother who refused to let her daughter's story be forgotten. Margaret McKeach stood outside Glasgow High Court that December day, finally able to say the words she had waited decades to speak. Justice has been done for Caroline, but questions still linger in the quiet streets of Bon Hill. How did 3 young people carry such a terrible secret for so long? What might have been different if that 4-year-old witness had been believed from the beginning? And how many other families are still waiting for their own moment of justice? Caroline Glachan was just 14 years old when her life was taken by those who should have protected her. She never got to graduate, never got to fall in love with someone who truly cared for her, never got to become the woman she was meant to be. Some say justice was finally served that day in court. Others say no sentence could ever truly account for 27 years of stolen tomorrows. But one thing is certain. Caroline's story proves that the truth, no matter how long it takes, has a way of finding the light. If this case moved you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. And in the comments below, let us know. Do you think the sentences were appropriate after 27 years? Our next video explores another cold case that shocked a community. Click here to watch how modern science finally solved a mystery that had baffled investigators for decades.